get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid. I have a horrifying tale for you this evening, soon to be evening, as the sun sets over the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Continue to get my 6, which means look behind me and see what sort of beast might have made that hideous scream. But today's story is not about that beast. It's about something much more hideous. It's about true terrors that happen to people of true flesh. I must warn you, this story is for a mature audience only. Such topics as ignorance and even incest are going to be discussed in this story. So if you're offended by ignorant inbreeders, okay, so here's the story. I knew a guy back in college that was very like-minded as myself. As a matter of fact, we both got degrees in nothingness. It's called a Board of Regents degree. It's like a bachelor's degree. It's in like general studies. You don't declare a major. And people would often say, well, why would you get a degree in that? And I would always say that I went to college to get an education, not a job. And this guy thought the same way. And we both felt that if you found something that you loved to do and you did it, you'd never work a day in your life. And he was a big picture kind of guy. And it's really weird. He had grown up on a farm in West by God, Virginia. And he knew everything about a farm. He knew about horses. He knew about gardening, growing crops, but he didn't like doing it. He didn't like having to depend upon it for money, and that was his family's livelihood. So being a think big kind of guy, what he told me he was going to do is that after he got his Board of Regents degree, which is a degree in nothingness, he was going to venture up into the New England states, up where there was a lot of generational wealth, because he explained to me that he could become like a caretaker or a manager of a property for like some folks that have a ton of money and they want their places to look beautifully landscaped, but they don't really want to get out there. They don't want to be the ones to get out there and do it. So they pay you can be a groundskeeper for a wealthy estate up in New England, and in today's dollars, probably make more money than you'd make doing just about anything else anywhere else. I saw him a few years after school. I ran into him, and turns out that he actually had achieved his goal. After he graduated with a degree in nothing, he left. He went up to Princeton, New Jersey, actually where Princeton University is, and got on board with a very wealthy family up there to work for. And I'd moved to Virginia by that time. We were back in Appalachia and ran into each other. And we were talking about how, when you run into other people who grew up in West Virginia, who leave the state, and then you run into each other, you always have that conversation about, how many West Virginia jokes did you hear when you went to your new state? And because that's what happens when you grow up in West Virginia, then you leave. People find out where you're from. They always laugh, throw their head back and laugh, and then they start telling you all these hillbilly jokes, right? And again, this is just one of them. Did you hear that the toothbrush was invented in West Virginia? No? Well, yeah, because had it been invented in any other state, it would have been called the teeth brush. So that's an example of one, and that's like the cleanest example because they get pretty crude, pretty nasty. And then, of course, people go on and on about, inbreeding and ignorance and all this stuff. And so we had that conversation, and he said, the guy he works for was about 40, came from one, long line of Fortune 400 family corporate dynasties, as did his wife, who was about the same age as him. And so it's two wealthy families married into each other there. And when he went to apply for the job to be the groundskeeper of this family's estate, they didn't have any kids, just a husband and a wife. And they asked him where he was from. He said, well, grew up in West by God, Virginia. He probably left the by God part out, but he said West Virginia. And the guy threw his head back and laughed, and he was like, no, seriously, where are you from? And he told him, no, I am from West Virginia. He goes, you don't talk like you're from West Virginia. And I get that a lot, too. And I always would say, how do people from West Virginia talk? And they'd be like, well, I don't know really, but I just didn't think they talked like you. You talk normal. So I guess they think people there talk abnormal. I don't know. So anyway, he finally convinced his employer that he was from West Virginia, and the guy was just stunned. He's like, he had all these ideas based upon the stereotypes, ignorant inbreeds, ignorant hillbillies, just all that terrible stuff, But he gave him the job, and he liked his employer, but he did say that he was very full of himself. He was a narcissist. The wife was not as bad, but she thought pretty highly of herself too. But at least she didn't always stay on him with the dumb hillbilly jokes or whatever. The husband kind of did, and he was always throwing up this ignorant inbreed thing. So, but it turns out that the boss's thing, like his hobby, was horse racing. He bred horses, and he spent a lot of time on the road racing, and his wife never went. And my buddy told me, the guy was always joking about incest. After he'd been working for him for about a year, he learned some things. He got to know these people, and one of the things he got to know was that they slept in different bedrooms. They seemed more like roommates than a married couple, and he actually said they seemed more like brother and sister, than a married couple. And so he started thinking, wow, he's giving me heck because, I'm from West by God, Virginia, so he's always throwing this ignorant inbreeding thing in my face. What's really going on here, But he thought that was just far-fetched, and he wouldn't have thought of it if the other guy wasn't always throwing it up in his face. So one time, the man goes down to Lexington, Kentucky, home of the Kentucky Derby. A lot of horse racing down there, and that was one of his regular stops when he'd leave town and often stay gone for a week when he was out dealing with his horses. Well, after my buddy had been working for this couple for a few years, the man goes down to Lexington with some horses. He's going to be down there for about a week, and he said that the lady of the house, his wife, got closer to him during that week than she ever had, almost to the point to where he thought that she might be thinking some inappropriateness stuff, but he said she never crossed that line. He said she just felt like she needed someone to talk to because she felt there was something amiss. Like this trip to Lexington wasn't going to be like every other trip to Lexington. And so my buddy was thinking that she's obviously thinking there's another woman. Something is going on. This trip's going to be different. Well, as it turned out, it was, because when the husband came back at the end of that week, he brought with him a beautiful, beautiful young lady. He didn't really look old enough to be her dad, but he certainly looked old enough to be her much older brother. Let's see, she was 19 and he was 35, 36. So, he would have had to have had her when he was 17. Like, he would probably accuse, the ilk like me and my buddy that I'm telling you this story about anyway of doing such a thing because of where we're from, right? So whatever, just more stereotypical crap. So my buddy was at the window, saw the man come in with this beautiful young lady who was obviously with child. She was pregnant, and they walk up to the wife. And the look on her face is just like, it was so mixed. My friend said he'd never seen a look like this on anybody's face before. He didn't know if she was angry, if she was in shock, if she was experiencing joy, because it was such a mixed up look. He'd never seen it. And the woman said something to the effect of, "Oh my God, how did you find her?" And the husband says, we just happened to meet at the races. she's pregnant. And the wife said, I see it. This is wonderful. And she got down on her knees and she's feeling where the baby bump is. And she goes, this is wonderful. This is fantabulous. And then she stands back up, and the husband and the girl, the young lady, they have no idea what's going on. They're looking at her like she's nuts. Well, the husband takes the young lady by the hand and says, I'm leaving you for her. I'm never coming back. And then it's like awareness shows, my friend says, on the face of the wife. It's just this look of awareness. And she just loses her crap. She starts beating on him, scratching at his face, saying, what have you done? What have you done? And so the man throws her off and he says to his, pregnant mistress, come on, let's get out of here. And so he grabs her and they run out of the house. And my buddy's watching as they're running across the lawn, going to their car, and they hear gunshot. One single gunshot goes off from inside the house. So the guy and his girlfriend race back to the house, as does my buddy. And make sure you're getting my 6 up here. And the woman was dead. In the living room, self-inflicted gunshot wound. And the guy looks at my buddy and says, you were here, you saw that this wasn't me. And my friend said, yeah. He says, I saw everything that took place. You might not like knowing that, but I'm sure you do like knowing, I know you didn't kill your wife. That was she made that choice to take her own life. He said, okay, good. You tell it to the cops when they get here. We're out of here. The guy left. He took his pregnant mistress, God only knows where. He truly must have been in love with this young lady, because he channeled off a lot of money that he had to an artificial account he had created, but it wasn't enough to continue to be rich, but it was enough to allow them to live happily ever after, have their little baby. And basically he disappeared. He wanted to disappear. He didn't want to be his name anymore. He didn't want to bring ruin to the family name, because here, I guess, when you come from a long line of generational wealth and you've got your name attached to a Fortune 400 company, you got to worry about what people might think, because it could tarnish the brand. And that's true. I mean, that sounded like I was being facetious, only to a degree, but that is true. You can't, it's bad for business. So here's what the guy didn't know. My friend would later find out that the guy, the husband, the cheating husband, and the wife who took her own life actually had been dating since they were teenagers. And when they were 17, she had gotten pregnant by him. It was their child, their unborn child. And both families, being that they couldn't, tarnish the family name, as it would be bad for business, decided that this child would be brought into the world, but it would be given up. And the girl, they made sure to keep the girl out of town the last 4 or 5 months of her pregnancy, so nobody noticed. She went away to the south of France for vacation, and when she came back, she had a nice tan, and she was no longer pregnant. Well, what they further, so they did that. The family forced that. But the couple stayed in love. They stayed together, and their parents didn't think that they would. That's one of the reasons they didn't want to have the baby there. But they ended up getting married, and then for some reason, who knows why, the woman just couldn't get pregnant again. So they never knew where the baby went. They had hired somebody to get the baby sent off to a family through ways of legal adoption, so everything was legal, but secretive. Well, the woman, the wife, who chose to take her own life in this tale, always felt like she wanted to know. So she actually paid someone else to track where this child went. It turns out the child was a girl. She ended up going to a wonderful family in Kentucky who happened to be caretakers for horses that raced, for thoroughbred horses. They took care of thoroughbred horses. That's what they did. And this family raised her well, and they got her in the family business. And fast forward about 18 years, 19 years after her birth, there's this good-looking rich guy who thinks highly of himself from Princeton, New Jersey, down there racing some horses, meets a beautiful young girl who works out in the horse stables, works with the horses in the horse stables, and she was just so pretty, and he felt almost a natural attraction to her. And he just had to have her despite the fact that he was married, and he did, and he impregnated her. And he wanted to leave his wife to spend the rest of his life with this young lady, and he did. So he took her to meet his wife so they could fess up face to face, and he could let his wife know she was leaving. And that's what he did with his new pregnant lady, number one. And then they heard that gunshot because his wife chose to take her own life. And what she never had the opportunity to tell him or her, his young pregnant mistress, is that she knew exactly who that young lady was when she walked through the door, because that's the daughter she'd been tracking. She felt perhaps her husband had been tracking their daughter too, and that the family was finally going to be reunited and that they were going to be grandparents. As it turned out, she thought wrong. And as my friend told me, this whole time, his highfalutin, blue-blooded, generational wealth snobby boss of his kept thinking he was the dumb, ignorant inbreeder. Who's the ignorant inbreeder now? See you for more next time.